You feel behind, not behind in a vague general way, behind in a specific aching way. Like everyone else got the memo and you didn't. Like life was supposed to be further along by now. You look around and something in you tightens. That quiet, persistent sense that you are late, that you have already missed something you were supposed to have. And the more your thoughts return to it, the heavier it gets. It's not sadness exactly. It's more like standing at the edge of something you can't quite place, watching everyone else seem to move forward, while you are still trying to figure out where you are. You know what to do, or at least you think you should know, but something in your mind won't move. And that gap between knowing and doing, between where you are and where you think you should be, that gap is where the suffering lives. And you're not alone in this. Buddhism has understood this pattern for a very long time. What it says about this feeling might change how you see yourself. That's what we're going to look at today. And you felt this, that quiet dread that arrives not in a crisis, but on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when nothing is technically wrong, but your mind keeps measuring, keeps comparing, keeps looking sideways at someone else's life and calculating the distance. Buddhism calls this tanha, translated roughly as craving or thirst. It's not just wanting something, it's wanting things to be different from how they are. And one of the most painful forms of tanha isn't about wanting more money or more love. It's wanting to already be at a different point in your life. Wanting to already be there. Already done, already arrived. Here's the thing about that feeling. It has almost nothing to do with where you actually are. Think about it this way. Two people can be in the exact same place in life. Same job, same apartment, same Friday evening. One of them feels okay. The other feels devastated. The difference isn't the circumstances. It's the story running underneath. One person is just living. The other is constantly measuring their life against an invisible timeline they built in their head. And the mind that lives inside that timeline doesn't know how to rest. It only knows how to compare. That comparison is where the exhaustion comes from. Not from your actual life, from the version of your life you're holding yourself up against. Buddhism doesn't say comparison is a moral failure. It says it's a very human pattern. The mind naturally grasps. It builds models of how things should be. It projects forward and then comes back to the present and feels the gap. That gap is real. The suffering it creates is real. But the timeline itself, the imaginary version of where you were supposed to be, that is something the mind assembled and something you can begin to see differently. Buddha said, "The trouble is, you think you have time." Most people read that as a reminder about death, but there's another way to hear it. The trouble is, you think time is the thing you're running out of. The trouble is, you've turned time into a race. And in a race, there is always someone ahead and someone behind. Once you enter that frame, you can never truly win. Because even when you get what you wanted, your mind will immediately find a new marker, a new someone to compare to, a new point further ahead. The race never ends. It only changes shape. And you know this feeling. You've been here before. You got something you wanted, and for a moment it felt like enough. And then, without anyone telling you to, your mind moved the marker, set a new threshold, found a new gap to sit with. This is what Buddhism means when it talks about the hungry ghost realm. Not a literal ghost, a metaphor for a mind that is always consuming, and never satisfied. A mind that no amount of arrival can fill, because the filling isn't the point. The wanting is the point. The measuring is the habit. And habits don't stop just because you cross a finish line. So if more achieving doesn't fix it, what does? Here's what nobody tells you about this. The behind feeling doesn't come from being behind. It comes from believing in the timeline. Not the calendar, not the clock. The story you absorbed about how life is supposed to unfold. By this age, by this year, by this milestone. You didn't invent that story from scratch. You received from family, from culture, from watching other people's highlights, and assembling a composite of what an acceptable life looks like. And then you measured yourself against that composite every day, often without noticing you were doing it. Buddhism invites you to look directly at that story, not to destroy it, not to pretend ambition is bad or progress doesn't matter, but to see it for what it is, a construction, a set of inherited assumptions about what life should look like. And once you see it as a construction, you don't have to treat it as a verdict. Because here's what the timeline actually is when you look closely. It's a collage. Pieces of your parents' expectations. Pieces of what your closest friends seem to be doing. Pieces of what the culture you grew up in rewarded and celebrated. Pieces of social media feeds that showed you curated highlights, not full lives. All of it stitched together into something that felt like a law, felt like a fact about the universe, when in reality, it was a story built from borrowed pieces. And you've been measuring your one real, irreplaceable life against a story made of fragments. That's not a small thing. That's worth sitting with for a moment. Because what happens when you actually trace the origin of that timeline, when you ask, where did this by 30 expectation come from? Where did the idea that certain things should be settled by a certain age come from? Most people, when they honestly look, discover that they don't know. They can't point to a clear decision they made. They can only point to a feeling that arrived gradually from everywhere at once. A feeling that solidified into something that felt permanent, something that felt like reality. And that is a specific kind of suffering. To live inside a rule you never consciously agreed to. To be judged by a court you never chose. Buddhism has a word for this too. It's part of what it calls dukkha, the low-grade friction woven into ordinary experience. Not dramatic suffering, not crisis. Just the constant low-grade sense that something is wrong, that you are not quite where you should be, that the gap between where you are and where you're supposed to be is your fault. And when you understand that the gap is partly created by the story itself, dukkha stops feeling like a personal failure and starts feeling like something you can actually work with. Because you can't investigate something you're too ashamed to look at. But when you see it clearly, when you see that the suffering is generated by the measurement, not just by the position, something opens up. You don't have to keep running the measurement. Not because your life is perfect as it is, not because there's nothing to work on or improve, but because the constant comparison is not giving you accurate information about your life. It's giving you information about the gap between your life and a story. And that's a very different thing. There's another layer to this worth looking at. The behind feeling doesn't just make you suffer. It also changes how you act. And the ways it changes how you act tend to make things worse. When you believe you're behind, urgency takes over. Not the productive kind of urgency, the panicked kind. The kind that makes you skip steps, make rushed decisions, take on too much at once. or oscillate between frantic effort and complete shutdown. Because the timeline is watching. Because you're already late and every slow day feels like falling further back. And that urgency, that internal pressure is not neutral. It clouds judgment. It makes you reach for things that look like progress, that look like catching up, even when they don't actually align with what you want. You take the job that looks right on paper, not the one that feels right in practice. You rush into commitments because your inner timeline says you should already be there. You skip the slow, necessary work because slow doesn't feel like catching up. And then, when those rushed choices don't feel quite right, you use them as evidence. Evidence that you're even further behind. Evidence that you keep getting it wrong. The belief generates the behavior. The behavior produces outcomes that confirm the belief, and the loop closes. Buddhism calls this dependent origination, the chain of cause and effect. The idea that experience isn't random, it follows patterns. And one of the most important insights in Buddhist teaching is that you can interrupt a pattern by seeing it clearly, not by forcing a different outcome. By seeing the mechanism. When you can see that the urgency comes from the belief, not from reality, you can start to question the urgency itself. And when the urgency loosens, even a little, you can start to make choices from a different place. Not from panic, not from the fear of falling further behind, from something quieter, from what actually matters to you. When the noise of comparison isn't running the whole decision. That's not a small thing. That's actually how lives change. Not through heroic moments of transformation, through the slow, steady interruption of patterns that were never serving you. And you've seen this in your own life already. The times you made a decision from panic and the times you made a decision from clarity that felt different in the body. They produce different results. The difference between those two states is not willpower. It's not discipline. It's whether the underlying story is running or quiet. When the story is running at full volume, every choice gets made inside its logic. When the story quiets, even briefly, you can hear something else. Something more like your own actual values. More like what you genuinely want, underneath the performance of catching up. Something is shifting in how you understand this. Because if the timeline is a story, then what you've been calling behind is also a story. Not a fact, not a law of the universe, a narrative. One that your mind keeps reaching for, keeps reinforcing, keeps treating as simply true. And it is very hard to step off a story while you're still living inside it, as if it's real. This is where the Buddhist concept of impermanence becomes something practical. Impermanence doesn't just mean everything changes and nothing lasts. It also means this. The timeline you're measuring yourself against is not solid. It was never solid. It was assembled from moments, from comparisons, from a culture that has its own ideas about what a good life looks like. And those ideas shift. They've always shifted. 100 years ago, the timeline looked completely different. A generation ago, the markers were placed in different locations. What counted as late, what counted as on track, what counted as a successful life. All of it has been renegotiated across generations and cultures. The imaginary destination you are trying to reach is not a fixed point in the universe. It's a social agreement that changes with time, and you have been suffering as if it were permanent. That doesn't make the feeling smaller. It makes the framework around the feeling visible. And that visibility matters, because you can't question something you can't see. When the feeling of being behind arrives, most people respond in one of two ways. They push harder, grind more, try to make up lost ground, or they collapse inward, conclude they are fundamentally broken, and stop trying. Both of those responses accept the premise. They accept the premise that the timeline is real and that being behind is a condition that needs fixing. Buddhism suggests a third option, not between pushing and collapsing, something prior to both of them. Looking at the premise itself, asking who built this timeline, asking, is this actually my life I'm measuring? Or am I measuring a story about a life? Asking, what would it feel like to live this day without the measurement running underneath it? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're actual inquiries, and they require slowing down enough to investigate, rather than just accepting the anxiety as a signal and reacting to it immediately. This is what Buddhist mindfulness practice actually does at its core. It's not about relaxation, though it can bring that. It's not about achieving a perfectly calm mind. It's about developing the capacity to see the mind's processes while they are happening, to watch the comparison arise, to notice the story assembling itself, to recognize the feeling of being behind, not as information about your position in life, but as information about the pattern your mind is running. And you can do this. Not perfectly, not all at once, but in small moments, in ordinary Tuesdays, in the pause between the feeling arriving and the reaction following it. That pause is where everything lives. Not a long pause, not a dramatic moment of spiritual awakening, just a small gap between stimulus and response. The moment where you notice what's happening before you've already reacted to it. In Buddhist practice, this is called sati, awareness, presence, not the absence of thoughts or feelings, but the presence of the part of you that can observe them. And when that awareness is active, even briefly, the behind feeling changes texture. It doesn't disappear, but it stops being total. It becomes something the mind is doing rather than something the world is telling you. And that's a real shift. A quiet one, but real. Buddha said, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. Most of us read that as inspiration. But when you're in the grip of the behind feeling, it becomes very specific guidance. The behind feeling lives almost entirely in comparison between past and future, between where you were supposed to be by now and where you imagine you still need to arrive. The present moment, the actual day you are currently living, doesn't usually contain the evidence that you're behind. That evidence is assembled in the mind. It's built from comparison. The present moment is just your life, which is actually happening right now. And it's possible to be here, not as a spiritual achievement, not as something you have to earn by meditating for years, just as a simple return, a choice you can make again and again. Every time the mind starts running the comparison, every time it pulls up the invisible timeline and starts measuring, you can notice that, and you can come back. Not because the present is perfect, but because it's real. And real is something you can actually work with. Here's where it gets practical. The mind that generates the behind feeling runs on contrast. It needs two things: where you are and where you should be. Take away one of those 2 points, and the feeling loses its foundation. You can't always control where you are. That's your actual life. But you can begin to question the second point, the should be, the imaginary finish line, not by pretending it doesn't exist, not by forcing yourself to feel grateful when you don't, but by genuinely asking where that finish line came from and whether it actually belongs to you. Because here is what most people discover when they actually look. The timeline they've been suffering under was never really theirs. It was inherited, absorbed without consent. They measured their life against a standard they never consciously chose. And when they see that clearly, something shifts. Not the circumstances. The grip of the timeline loosens. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because they stopped treating a borrowed story as a personal verdict. And that creates space. Space to actually ask what you do want, what you actually value. What kind of life would feel real and meaningful to you? Not to the composite standard you absorbed from 100 different sources. That's a much more interesting question than whether you're behind. And it's a question the behind feeling never lets you ask, because the behind feeling is too busy comparing to stop and inquire. This is what Buddhism is pointing at when it talks about the middle way. Not the middle between effort and laziness. The middle between grasping and diversion. The space where you can engage with your life fully, genuinely, with real effort and real care, without making your worth dependent on whether the timeline says you're on track. Consider what it would mean to approach one single day, not as a unit of catching up, but as a unit of living. Not asking, did I get closer to where I should be? But asking, was I actually here for this? That's a Buddhist question in its simplest form. Not am I on track, but am I present? Not am I performing a life correctly, but am I actually inside this one? Those two questions produce completely different kinds of days, and over time, completely different kinds of lives. Not lives without ambition, not lives without direction or effort, but lives that are built from the inside rather than measured from the outside. Lives where the motivation comes from something real, rather than from the fear of falling further behind in a race you never consciously entered. That's worth more than catching up. That's worth more than arriving on time. That's a harder thing to do than it sounds. It's not passive. It's not resignation. It's actually more demanding than grinding, because grinding lets you stay inside the story. What Buddhism asks is that you question the story while still living the life. Work on things that matter to you. Move toward what you care about, and release the measurement. Not perfectly, but again and again, every time you notice it starting. Each time you catch the comparison rising, and choose not to follow it all the way down, you are practicing something. You are practicing the difference between having a thought and being run by it, between a mind that notices its own patterns and a mind that is entirely submerged in them. That practice doesn't erase the timeline overnight. It doesn't guarantee anything. But over time, something shifts in how much weight the comparison carries. It starts to feel less like the truth and more like a habit, less like reality and more like a program running in the background. And once you can see it as a program, you can begin to ask whether it's a program worth keeping. And that's the thing about all of this. The feeling that you're behind is not evidence that you failed. It's evidence that you've been running a very specific mental program for a very long time. A program that compares what is to what should be and generates suffering from the gap. Buddhism doesn't ask you to stop caring about your life. It doesn't tell you to give up on growth or stop wanting things to be better. It asks you to see the difference between genuine movement, genuine effort, genuine building, and the suffering that comes from measuring all of it against a story that was never yours to begin with. You are not behind. You are here. And here is the only place where anything has ever actually happened. The only place where anything can be built, chosen, or lived. Not the version of you that arrived on time. This version, the one who is here right now, carrying the weight of a timeline that may not belong to you. Take that with you today. Not as an instruction, not as a thing to get right, just as something to return to. A small inquiry. Every time the mind starts measuring, a quiet question. Whose timeline is this? And underneath that question, a quieter truth. You have more room than the comparison allows you to feel. If this kind of exploration helps you, there are more videos here built around exactly this. Buddhist ideas applied to the real, ordinary texture of living. Consider subscribing if you'd like more of this in your life.